Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I came home expecting warmth. The scent of something sweet lingering from the oven, laughter bouncing down the hallway, a movie humming from the living room. Maybe even Noelle, curled up on the couch with her hair up in a lazy bun, offering me a slice of pie like we hadn't argued about the guest list the night before. But instead, what I walked into was silence. A hollow kind of quiet that didn't just fill the space, it echoed. It pressed against my chest. At first, I thought maybe they had gone out for a last-minute grocery run. Then I saw her, Dolores, Noelle's grandmother, slouched in the recliner like someone who hadn't moved in hours. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and stepped inside, trying not to let the stillness creep into my voice as I called out, "Noelle?" No answer. The house looked lived in, but untouched. There were 2 wine glasses in the sink, a cardigan tossed across the back of a dining chair, a shoe on the staircase. But it all felt staged. Or worse, abandoned. Then I saw it. A folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter, balanced neatly beside a glass of water and the little ceramic pumpkin Noelle used as fall decor. My name was written across the top in her handwriting. I hesitated. The air felt charged, like something irreversible was about to begin. I unfolded the note. "Gone to a show with my ex. We need to catch up. I thought it was time you experienced caregiving. Don't worry, Grandma's all yours. Love, Noelle." My hands trembled as I stared at the words. Not because I didn't understand them, but because I did. Fully. Painfully. This wasn't a favor. This was a message. A test. A game. Maybe even a punishment. I looked up slowly, half expecting Dolores to still be dozing. But the woman in the recliner was no longer slumped. She was awake, sitting upright, eyes wide open and far too alert for someone who was supposed to be asleep. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find that," she said. Her voice was strong, not fragile, not feeble. It stopped me in my tracks. I blinked. Dolores. She rose from the chair with the sort of control that made me question every story Noelle had told me about her deteriorating condition. She moved with intention, brushing a wrinkle from her blouse as she approached me. "Shall we begin?" she asked, calmly. Like this was an appointment. A ritual. A scheduled unveiling. I stood frozen for a beat too long, still holding the note like it might vanish if I folded it wrong. What exactly are we beginning?" She smiled, not unkindly. But there was a sharpness behind it, like she was sizing me up, deciding how much I could handle. "You'll see," she said. "But first, let's put that note away. We won't need it anymore." I set it down slowly, glancing between her and the countertop, half expecting Noelle to walk in any second and yell, "Surprise." Just kidding. But nothing happened. The silence held. Dolores turned and walked toward the kitchen table. With the grace of someone half her age, she pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit. I did, still unsure whether I was part of an elaborate prank or the setup to something far more serious. "You look like a man who's just realized the floor beneath him might be made of sand," she said, sitting across from me. "How does it feel?" I stared at her. "I don't know yet." She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "Good answer." She reached into a drawer nearby and pulled out a teapot. Chamomile, from the scent. The same kind she used to request when Noelle brought her over for visits. I'd made it for her a dozen times. I always thought she just liked the taste. But tonight, the ritual felt different. She poured with purpose. No shaking hands. No confusion. Just clarity. I watched her, trying to piece things together. "Noelle said you were declining," I said slowly. She snorted. "Noelle says a lot of things. Doesn't make them true." I sat back in the chair, the truth beginning to settle in strange corners of my mind. She lied. Dolores sipped her tea. She curated a version of me that was useful to her. Weak. Confused. Dependent. It let her feel powerful. And now, Dolores set down her cup, leaning slightly forward. Now, she's given me exactly what I wanted. Time. Privacy. And you. My pulse quickened. Me? She smiled again. This time, something in her eyes softened. "You've been kind, Jonas. Patient. Blind, perhaps, but not unkind. And you deserve to know the truth about the woman you married." I stared at her, unsure what to say. I didn't yet know what game I was in. But I knew this much. The rules had just changed. And Dolores? She wasn't just a piece on the board. She was the one who had flipped it. "My name is Jonas Fairchild. I've been married to Noelle for 4 years. And somehow, despite all the clues, all the uncomfortable silences, and all the subtle jabs passed off as jokes. I never saw this coming. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I was too focused on holding our fragile puzzle together to notice she had already tossed a few pieces out the window. Noelle had always been self-centered. Not in the overt, throw a fit in public kind of way, but quiet, strategic. Her needs came first, always. If she wanted sushi, we got sushi. If she didn't feel like visiting my parents, we canceled. I once drove 4 hours to surprise her at a retreat she said was women only. She acted gracious, even kissed my cheek in front of her friends. But in private, she said, "Don't do that again." I told myself she just needed space. Independence. I thought loving her meant making room for her to be who she wanted. Now, standing in my own kitchen with her grandmother handing me a medication schedule, I realized what loving her had really meant. Constant compromise. Sometimes of time. Sometimes of dignity. Dolores tapped the paper. "These are just supplements, nothing serious. She thinks I'm too old to manage capsules. Funny, right?" I looked down at the neat grid of dosages and times. "You seem fine to me." "That's because I am," she said, stirring her tea with deliberate ease. "What's not fine is the performance Noelle puts on for anyone who might listen to her sob story about the husband who's just not ambitious enough." My chest tightened. I didn't like how fast that landed. "She said that." "She said worse," Dolores replied, sipping her tea again. "I've got the texts if you want to read them. She talks about you like you're a stepping stone." Her words, not mine. My hand clenched the arm of the chair. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I didn't want to ask questions I already feared the answers to. But silence wouldn't save me now. Dolores stood and walked into the adjacent room. A few seconds later, she returned with a thick manila folder. She placed it gently in front of me, like it was a gift I hadn't earned yet. "I started collecting these after her second attempt to transfer my accounts into her name," she said flatly. I flinched. "She what?" "Power of attorney." She tried to get me to sign it twice. Once while I was half asleep. Once after pretending I'd forgotten the password to my own email. I played along. Let her think I was declining faster than I really was. That's what she wanted. Made her feel useful. In control. She slid the folder toward me. I hesitated, then opened it. At first, it just looked like bills. Then I saw the hotel invoices. From out of state. Dated 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. My stomach dropped. Next to the receipts was a printout of a message thread. Text bubbles filled with flirtation and familiarity, all between Noelle and her ex-boyfriend Camden. Things like, "I've missed you," and "Can't wait to see you again," weren't the worst of it. It was the timestamped plans. Dinner at Balthazar. A Broadway show. A hotel suite under Camden's name, but billed to Noelle's card. She had planned this escape. This abandonment. Not as an impulsive reunion, but as a scheduled betrayal. She said she was going to help her cousin with wedding planning that weekend. I muttered. Dolores raised an eyebrow. She always did lie prettier when it involved the arts. I stared at the papers until the words started to blur. My ears buzzed, and the air felt thick like syrup. "She left you with me as a chore," I said slowly. "A punishment. Perhaps. Or perhaps she handed you the key to the cage she built and didn't expect you to unlock it." I looked up. Dolores's face was calm, but there was a spark in her eye. Not anger. Not pity. Purpose. "She never wanted a partner," I said quietly. "She wanted a prop. And you," Dolores replied, "are far too solid to be anyone's accessory." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My mind felt like it was sprinting through every conversation, every cold glance, every time Noelle had told me I was too sensitive when I brought up my needs. "She said you were fragile," I said, still staring at the papers. "I am," Dolores replied, "but not in the way she thinks. I'm fragile like porcelain. Hard to break. And even harder to replace." We sat in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind. The kind that feels like the ground reassembling beneath your feet. "What'd I do with this?" I finally asked. Dolores stood again, walked to the sink, and rinsed her cup. "Whatever you want, Jonas. But if I were you, I'd stop asking for permission to breathe." Her words weren't just advice. They were permission. Liberation. A subtle nudge toward the door I hadn't realized was always unlocked. That night, I didn't sleep much. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't because I was afraid. It was because I was finally awake. The next morning, I brewed the tea this time. Dolores didn't hover. She just sat at the kitchen table, waiting with the same calm composure that made it hard to believe she'd ever been underestimated. The chamomile steeped as I stared at the folder on the counter, still open where I'd left it last night. The weight of it was more than paper. It was 4 years of pretending not to notice the way Noelle's affection always came with a price tag. For years of biting my tongue during family dinners where I was the invisible man, the plus one she barely introduced. I brought the mug to Dolores. She accepted it with a quiet nod, then looked me in the eyes and said, "Time for some truths. You ready?" I thought I was. Until she started talking. "She's been rewriting history since the day you met her," Dolores began, blowing gently across the tea surface. "Told her friends you chased her for months when you were the one who got invited to that art exhibit by her first. Told her mother you begged her to move in, when I remember her packing your boxes while you were still working late nights." I blinked, then let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, but because I remembered those moments exactly as Dolores described them. Noelle had shown up at my apartment one Saturday, bags in hand, no discussion. Just well, I'm here now, and the expectation that I'd rearrange everything to accommodate her. I did. Dolores reached under the table and slid a stack of papers across to me. At first, I thought they were more receipts, more messages. But these were different. Printed emails, screenshots of group texts, all from a group I'd never seen before. "The family chat," Dolores said, as if reading my confusion. "I'm not in it. But my nurse once was. She sent me these. Left the job because of how Noelle treated her." I started reading. It was like peeling skin off old wounds. Noelle's sisters mocked my job, called me a glorified tech repairman. Her mother once said I was a placeholder until something shinier came along. And Noelle? She didn't defend me. She joined in. Joked about how long I'd stick around. Called me safe. Said I was the kind you settle for when the dream guys disappoint. Each message felt like a slap. Not because they were unexpected, but because deep down, I think I always suspected she didn't see me. Not really. I was just the man who filled the seat next to her. The stable one. The listener. The one who could be counted on to carry the groceries, fix the Wi-Fi, nod along at the right times. Dolores sipped her tea again. She thought I was asleep the night she booked that hotel with Camden. Thought I didn't hear her say she'd never loved anyone who didn't make her feel reckless. My grip tightened around the edge of the table. "And you didn't say anything?" "I waited," Dolores replied. "Because I've learned that truth lands harder when people fall into it themselves. And you, Jonas, you were always worth more than how she treated you. But you needed to see it with your own eyes." I swallowed the lump in my throat. She stayed with me out of convenience. She stayed because you made her look good. Because her world is about appearances, and you gave her stability. A steady man with no scandal. "And you stayed behind?" She smiled. "I stayed to make sure you didn't miss the exit." The room felt different now. As if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this truth to unspool. I sat back in the chair, letting the silence stretch between us. "She ever loved me?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Dolores looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, softly, "I think she loved how you made her feel about herself. But that's not the same thing." I nodded. I understood. I had loved her more than she had ever loved me, but even that felt like a half-truth now. Maybe I'd loved the idea of being chosen, of being the good guy who was finally enough. I hadn't realized I was just filling a role in her play. "I'm sorry," Dolores said. "You didn't do this," I replied. "No," she said, "but I've watched it happen long enough. And now it's time you stopped watching too." She pushed a small box across the table. I opened it. Inside was a key and a USB drive. The key is to my safety deposit box. The drive has copies of everything, just in case she tries to twist the narrative. I looked at her, startled. "You're giving me this?" "I'm giving you a way out. And a way forward." I sat there, staring at the key like it might burn my hand. For years I'd been waiting for Noelle to choose me, to value me. And now, someone else had someone who actually saw me. Dolores stood and stretched, her joints cracking a little. "Time to take your life back, Jonas. It's long overdue." And with that, she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me with a cup of tea, a stack of proof, and a choice I could no longer ignore. "You've been protecting a marriage that doesn't protect you." Dolores said it like she was commenting on the weather, her voice light but surgical. We were in the living room, sunlight cutting soft patterns through the window blinds, dust floating like tiny dancers between us. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and chamomile, and the quiet crackle of the fireplace was the only sound besides her words, each one slicing a little deeper than the last. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, staring at the carpet pattern like it might give me an answer. My chest was tight. Her sentence echoed, again and again. You've been protecting a marriage that doesn't protect you. She didn't say it to be cruel. Dolores had a way of delivering truth with grace, like a surgeon with a steady hand, calculated, but compassionate. I looked up, unsure whether to defend Noelle or just exhale and let the truth settle. Dolores didn't wait. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her gaze unwavering. The moment I heard Camden's name again, I knew what she was doing. And I knew what I had to do. What did you do? I asked, already feeling like I wouldn't be ready for the answer. I made this weekend a test, she said. One she didn't even know she was taking. She thought she was teaching you a lesson in responsibility. But I flipped the script. She left you with me because she assumed you'd panic, fail, maybe even lash out. She expected chaos. Instead, you listened. You stayed. And more importantly, you saw her. I didn't speak. There was a part of me that wanted to scream, to cry, to rage, but nothing came. Just a sharp clarity that was growing louder than the noise she'd left behind. The next 72 hours, as it turned out, became something I didn't expect, a ritual. It started with routine. We cooked together, Dolores insisting on chopping onions herself, her knife work precise despite her age. We cleaned the guest room, folded laundry, even reorganized the spice rack, which had driven her crazy for years. It was all so domestic, so normal. And yet, each task became its own kind of therapy, like reclaiming control, one drawer at a time. But the evenings, that's when the real unraveling happened. Dolores would bring out her tea, sit by the fireplace, and tell stories. At first, they sounded like family anecdotes, harmless and even funny. But slowly, she started to peel back the curtain on who Noelle really was behind closed doors. The attempt to secure power of attorney. The way her family joked about me in private. The group texts full of mockery and strategy, how they tried to steer me into certain financial decisions, how they treated me like a background character in my own life. I'd never seen Dolores look so alive. She recited their messages like poetry, not out of spite, but from a place of firm, intentional justice. She showed me screenshots of Noelle planning to move funds into joint accounts she never contributed to. Pictures of her trying on rings with Camden, weeks before our last anniversary. My heart didn't just break, it recalibrated. It started shedding every excuse I'd built up over the years. You were their safe bet, Dolores said that second night, her voice low but steady. The fallback man. The one they could count on not to ask too many questions. Not to fight back. Because you were kind. I looked at her. You make kindness sound like a weakness. It's not, she replied. It's only a weakness when you give it to people who treat it like currency. When you stop giving it to yourself. That night, I stood in the guest room and started packing. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I needed to prepare. The act of folding my shirts, zipping my bag, it wasn't about leaving, not yet. It was about reclaiming something. My voice. My worth. My place in the narrative. Dolores walked in halfway through. She didn't say anything at first. Just watched me fold a pair of jeans. Then she spoke, gently. This isn't about revenge, Jonas. It's about clarity. You don't need to hurt her to heal yourself. But you do need to stop bleeding for someone who keeps handing you the knife. I sat on the edge of the bed. My throat was tight. I kept hoping she'd change. That something would click. She won't, Dolores said simply. Because she doesn't need to. You already did all the adapting. For a long time, I'd thought love was supposed to hurt a little. That sacrifice was proof of commitment. That if I was just a little more patient, a little more understanding, she'd meet me halfway. But Noelle never planned to meet me anywhere. She wanted a placeholder. A well-behaved man in the audience while she lived the spotlight life. Now I had someone in the front row holding up a mirror instead. Dolores stood, walked over, and squeezed my shoulder. The next time she walks through that door, you won't be the same man she left behind. And I believed her. Not because she said it, but because, for the first time in years, I wanted it to be true. The folder Dolores handed me was thick and heavy, the kind of weight that didn't just rest in your hands, it shifted something in your chest. She placed it on the dining table like a final piece in a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was solving. I hadn't touched it yet. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I already knew. Whatever was inside would change everything. Everything you need is in there, she said, voice calm as ever. Her financial secrets. The trust her grandfather left me. And the clause that protects it from manipulation. I finally sat down and opened the folder. The documents were arranged neatly, methodically. Dolores hadn't just prepared this overnight. She'd been collecting, planning, waiting. Inside were statements showing Noelle had tried twice to access a trust account Dolores had quietly restructured 3 years ago. Emails where she encouraged her lawyer to fast-track the transition of assets, assuming, as always, that her grandmother was too frail or too far gone to notice. She thought she'd inherit by default, Dolores said, sipping from a glass of water. She thought I was done playing chess. But I've been playing the long game, Jonas. Her voice held no pride, just a clear-eyed certainty. The kind you only hear from people who've lived long enough to stop bluffing. I pulled out a signed document, notarized, stamped. Dolores had transferred the bulk of her assets into a secondary trust. One that named me, not Noelle, as the executor and sole inheritor. My heart stumbled over itself. I looked at her, stunned. I can't accept this, I said, the words catching halfway out of my throat. You already did, she replied. You just didn't know it yet. I shook my head slowly. Why me? She tilted her head, not in confusion, but as if she'd expected the question and had rehearsed the answer in her sleep. Because you're the only one who's ever cared without asking for something in return. The words hit like a tide. I'd spent years giving to Noelle's family, helping her brother land a job, driving her mother to appointments, lending her cousin money I never saw again. And still, I'd been invisible. Worse than invisible, I'd been useful. Dolores saw that. All of it. And still, this? A trust? Her legacy? I didn't do anything to earn this, I whispered. She leaned forward. You endured. That's not the same. No, she said. It's harder. The quiet that followed was thick with things unsaid, grief, relief, a strange kind of mourning for the marriage I'd fought for while it slowly dismantled itself behind my back. I thumbed through more documents. Letters of instruction. Passwords. A sealed envelope addressed to her attorney. She had covered every angle. You knew this day would come, I said. I suspected, she answered. Noelle's always been hungry, and you were too generous to see it. That one stung, because it was true. I'd called it love, that generosity. All those times I brushed aside my needs, rationalized her behavior, told myself she was just misunderstood. I'd carried the weight of the relationship like it was a badge of honor. And now I was looking at the receipts, literally, of how much it had cost me. I don't want her to think I manipulated you. Dolores laughed, a soft, elegant sound. Jonas, darling, if anyone accuses you of manipulation, just show them my medical records. Full mental clarity, signed by 3 different doctors. I've had this notarized, filed, and reviewed more thoroughly than her wedding guest list. I actually smiled. The humor was unexpected, but it helped me breathe again. She's going to hate me. She already resents you, Dolores said, but she'll hate me more. And that's fine. I can live with that. I closed the folder slowly. And what am I supposed to do now? She looked at me as if the answer was obvious. Whatever you want. That stopped me. I hadn't really thought about what I wanted. For so long, I've been acting in reaction to Noelle, putting out emotional fires, adjusting to her whims, trying to maintain some version of peace in a house that rarely had any. But now, I had options. Power. And that was terrifying. I don't know how to be free, I admitted. Dolores stood, walked over, and placed a hand on my shoulder. That's because you've never been allowed to be. The air felt heavy, but not oppressive. Like the moments before a storm clears, when you can finally feel the wind shift. I looked up at her, this woman who had been framed as fragile and dependent, and saw steel. I won't waste what you've done, I said. I know, she replied. That's why I chose you. We stood in silence for a moment longer. Noelle was still gone. Probably laughing with Camden over drinks, thinking she was clever. Thinking I was clueless. But the game had changed. And she hadn't noticed that someone else had moved all the pieces. I went upstairs, folder in hand. Not to hide it, but to prepare. To protect it. And to get ready. Because the next time Noelle walked through that door, I would not be the man who begged for her attention. I would be the one delivering the final play. For days later, the front door creaked open like the first chord of a bad song I already knew the lyrics to. I was standing in the kitchen, the documents still locked away, the trust secured, the envelope prepared. Dolores sat at the table, reading the morning paper with her signature cup of chamomile beside her. Sunlight caught the edge of her silver hair, but her face was composed, unreadable. She hadn't said a word when I woke up. She didn't need to. The door slammed shut, and I heard laughter, Noelle's familiar high-pitched one, the fake kind she used at fundraisers and cocktail hours. Then a deeper one followed. Camden. Of course it was him. The sound made my spine lock. Their footsteps came next, shoes clicking against the hardwood, careless and unhurried. Like this was just any day. Like she hadn't walked out of our marriage and handed me a note like a grocery list. Like this was her house. And then she saw me. She stopped mid-stride in the entryway, Camden halting behind her. Her eyes flicked to me, then to Dolores, then back to me again. The air shifted. Her voice came out thin, stretched. What is this? I let her sit in that silence a second longer than she liked. A conversation, I said calmly, followed by consequences. Camden raised an eyebrow and chuckled under his breath. You rehearsing a courtroom scene, or? I didn't even look at him. I reached into the drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. Neat. Crisp. Addressed to Noelle. What is this? She repeated, louder now, her voice climbing the ladder of panic one rung at a time. I slid the envelope across the island counter toward her. She didn't move to take it. So I opened it myself and laid out the contents like tarot cards. The screenshots, text messages between her and Camden, date-stamped, time-locked, hotel receipts, dinner reservations, selfies from his phone, pulled from the cloud by a friend of mine who specialized in digital recovery. I wasn't just guessing anymore. I had the entire timeline. Then came the revised trust documents. The will update. The power of attorney paperwork that she had tried to forge, disproved by notarized statements and timestamps. And finally, the annulment agreement. Noelle stared at it all as if it had materialized from another world. You went through my messages? I stared back. You left your iPad unlocked. And your grandmother with eyes wide open. Her mouth parted, a comeback almost born, but nothing came. She looked at Dolores, who hadn't lifted her eyes from the newspaper. No, this is insane, Noelle said, her voice cracking now. You're taking her side? Dolores turned a page. My side? You left me with a note and a bottle of supplements, Noelle. That's not a side. That's abandonment. Camden tried to insert himself again. Okay, this is all getting weird. Babe, maybe we should just... Don't call her that, I snapped, my voice low and sharp. He flinched, visibly. Good. I turned back to Noelle, steadying myself. You said you wanted me to experience caregiving. I did, but not how you planned. Dolores wasn't the one who needed taking care of. I was. Noelle's hands trembled now, reaching toward the documents like they might rearrange themselves if she just flipped them fast enough. What do you want from me? She asked. I met her eyes, and this time, I didn't blink. Nothing. I want out. Camden laughed again, smug. So that's what this is about? Some revenge breakup to her. I slid a second envelope across the counter, this one addressed to him. A printed draft of a restraining order, already in motion. Names. Dates. Witness statements. His face fell when he saw it. You stalked my wife, I said. While we were still legally married. Shared hotel rooms. There's enough here to keep you busy for months. He took a step back. You're bluffing. You're free to test that theory, Dolores said, finally folding her paper and looking up at him like he was a poorly written character in a play she didn't enjoy. Noelle shook her head, tears forming now, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. You're ruining everything, she hissed. You ruined everything, I said, not angry. Just done. And now, you don't get to narrate it. I could see it in her face. That quiet horror of someone who had always controlled the narrative, realizing for the first time that the audience had turned. Dolores rose from her chair, elegant and slow, and walked to my side. She looked at Noelle and Camden with a kind of cold majesty I hadn't seen before. You may leave now, she said, voice regal and final. And take the trash with you. They stood there a moment longer, but it was over. They knew it. Camden turned first, muttering curses under his breath. Noelle lingered, her lip trembling, but eventually she followed him out the door. When the silence returned, it felt earned. Dolores looked at me and raised her cup. To clarity. I nodded, something loosening in my chest. To the end of pretending. And then, for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Fallout isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in whispers. In the tight, calculated silence that follows a public collapse. In this case, it started online. The morning after Noelle left with Camden, storming out like she still had the moral high ground, her Instagram lit up with curated sadness. A black and white photo of our wedding day captioned, "Some chapters end before you're ready." A carousel of soft-lit images featuring her alone on beaches, holding coffee cups with that faraway, wounded gaze. The comments poured in. You deserve better. He didn't know what he had. Sending love and light, Queen. She played it perfectly. Cryptic but dramatic. Her parents followed suit. Her mother sent out a group text to family and mutual friends. Jonas has been manipulating Dolores in her old age. We fear elder abuse. Legal action may be necessary. Her father called me a gold digger in a voicemail that was more slurred than coherent. I didn't respond. Not to the texts, the posts, the thinly veiled attacks. I didn't clap back, didn't release screenshots, didn't post my side of the story. Not because I didn't have one, but because I no longer needed the validation. Dolores, however, had other plans. She called me into the study 2 days later. It was a cozy room, tucked at the back of the house, bookshelves crammed with mysteries, an old record player humming soft jazz in the corner. She sat with her phone in her lap, an eerie calm about her. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said. I blinked. "You mean, publicly?" She nodded once. "I may be old, but I'm not obsolete. And I won't sit quietly while they smear your name." Before I could argue, she tapped her phone screen and held it up. She had recorded a full 10-minute video, clear and crisp. In it, she spoke with unshaking poise about everything: how Noelle had lied about her condition, the attempt to gain power of attorney, the forged documents, the way she'd manipulated the family. She laid it all bare. No anger, just fact. Then she looked directly into the camera and said, "And as for Jonas Fairchild, he is the only one who ever treated me like a human being, and I will not let that be twisted." She posted it to her rarely used social accounts with the caption, "Truth doesn't need filters." Within hours, it went viral. It wasn't just because of the content, it was Dolores herself. A silver-haired woman speaking with such fire, such eloquence, in defense of someone half her age. It struck a nerve. People shared it. News outlets picked it up. Elderly woman defends grandson-in-law in viral video exposing family greed. I didn't even know how to process it. The quiet, invisible life I had built was suddenly under a spotlight I never asked for. My phone exploded with interview requests, messages from strangers thanking me for setting an example, people telling me they'd been through similar betrayals. Noelle, predictably, doubled down. She posted a story in response, a photo of her crying, mascara streaked down her face, captioned, "Family is supposed to protect you, not weaponize you." Her followers ate it up for about a day. Then the truth started crawling into her curated feed. People commenting, linking Dolores's video, questioning the contradictions in her timeline. Screenshots from anonymous sources began surfacing, photos of her and Camden at that hotel, timestamped. A few brave followers even spoke up. I was at the same gallery. She wasn't crying when she was wrapped around him. The narrative was slipping, and the more she tried to control it, the worse it got. Her family, once the perfect portrait of upscale grace, began to fracture publicly. Her mother's employer issued a statement about reassessing roles after internal investigations. Her father deleted all his social accounts. I watched it all from the porch with Dolores, a blanket draped over her lap, tea in hand. "Did you ever imagine it would go this far?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Truth has a way of spreading. You don't need to yell it. You just need to say it once and mean it." We clinked mugs, not in celebration, but in quiet understanding. What struck me most was how calm I felt. Months ago, this would have wrecked me. I'd have spiraled, trying to defend myself, prove my worth, fix the version of me that someone else distorted. But now, I didn't feel the urge to fight back. The war had already been won, by silence, by proof, by the power of standing still while the world realized it had been cheering for the wrong hero. Noelle still texted sometimes. Sporadic messages that ranged from apologetic to venomous. One read, "You're heartless, Jonas. You let her humiliate me." Another said, "You used her to get back at me. You think you're better now." I never replied. Because I wasn't better. I was just done. For once, I wasn't the one patching holes in a leaking ship. I wasn't the one trying to control how I was seen, hoping someone would choose me. I was done handing out grace like it was candy, done proving myself to people who only saw me as convenient. Let them unravel. Let them choke on the silence they once mistook for weakness. Because this time, I held the thread, and I wasn't pulling it anymore. Noelle filed the lawsuit 3 weeks after Dolores's video broke the internet. I was having lunch with Dolores on the patio, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup between us, when I got the email. Subject line, "Notice of Civil Action, Camden and Noelle Windsor versus Jonas Fairchild." I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen, the pit in my stomach heavy but dull. Dolores took one look at me and said, "Well, I was wondering what took her so long." I finally tapped into it. Defamation, elder coercion, undue influence. They were reaching. They even tried to argue that I had seduced Dolores into altering her estate, a phrase that made her laugh for a full minute, tears streaming down her cheeks. Seduction? Please. I haven't been seduced since Nixon was in office, she said, wiping her eyes. But the laugh didn't last long. These accusations weren't just dramatic, they were damaging. And I knew Noelle's family. They had money, resources, lawyers who loved the spotlight and would drag things out just to see us sweat. What they didn't count on was how prepared Dolores already was. Her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Marla Estes, had been quietly gathering evidence since Dolores first updated her trust. Video testimonials, time-stamped audio logs, doctor-certified statements attesting to her mental clarity. They even had footage of Noelle yelling at a pharmacy technician about her grandmother's prescription refills. One of the many incidents that Marla said painted a very persuasive picture. I met with Marla 3 days after the notice hit. Her office smelled like leather and old books. She reviewed the documents with me calmly, confidently, then said, "They're bluffing. They're hoping to shake you, ruin your name, and pressure Dolores into reversing everything." "What do I do?" I asked. "You fight," she said. "Not because you want revenge, but because you're telling the truth, and truth deserves defense." So we did. The court hearings were brutal. Noelle showed up in muted pastels, clutching tissues and crying during testimony. Camden wore a suit too tight across the shoulders, pretending to be a supportive partner as he painted himself as the third-party victim of my manipulation. They paraded friends and relatives to the stand, people I'd once hosted in my home, shared meals with each one offering carefully rehearsed versions of events that made me sound like a schemer. But when Dolores took the stand, the entire courtroom changed. She walked up slowly but steadily, her cane tapping softly with each step. When she sat down, she adjusted the mic like a pro, smiled at the judge, and then, without notes or hesitation, she told the story. Her story. "I've known deception," she said. "I lived through wars, recessions, and 3 cheating husbands. You learn to spot a lie from a mile away. And my granddaughter? She's been lying since she was 10. Laughter rippled across the gallery, but her tone never wavered. "Jonas didn't seduce me. He didn't manipulate me. He didn't even want the damn money. I gave it to him because he's the only one in my family who ever made me feel like a person instead of a pawn. He brought me tea. He listened. He didn't ask for a dime. That's love, Your Honor. Real love." Then she pulled out the folder. The same one she gave me weeks ago, with every receipt, every printed message, every document signed and dated. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. By the time her testimony ended, the judge looked exhausted. He recessed early that day. And 2 weeks later, the ruling came in. The trust stood. No coercion. No fraud. No abuse. Noelle's case collapsed like a paper house in the rain. But I wasn't done. I filed counterclaims, defamation, emotional distress, and fraud. Not because I wanted to keep fighting, but because there had to be accountability. For the lies. For the humiliation. For the part of me that almost believed I deserved it. Dolores backed me fully. Marla pursued it with clinical precision. Every post Noelle had made, every message she'd sent claiming I'd brainwashed her grandmother, every public attempt to rewrite the story, we compiled it all. Depositions started. Noelle's voice cracked under pressure. Camden stopped showing up. Their lawyer tried to settle quietly, even offered a gag order and a payout. We declined. By the end of the process, Noelle's parents had racked up over $100,000 in legal fees. Her mother was asked to resign from a nonprofit board. Her father's small accounting firm took a PR hit they couldn't spin away. They called me vindictive. They called me manipulative. I didn't care. This wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. It was closure. Because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving Noelle's chaos. I was building something in the ashes of it. The case finally wrapped months later, and though I didn't walk away with a check or an apology, I walked away clean. Respected. Unbroken. They tried to burn me down. But all they did was light a match beneath a man who had already stopped pretending to be anything but fire. Thanksgiving arrived like an echo of the one that had started it all, but this time, there was no silence. No folded note. No empty place at the table with questions clinging to the air like cobwebs. This time, there was just warmth. And laughter. And cranberry sauce splattered across the counter because I had absolutely no clue how to use a hand mixer. Dolores laughed as I cursed under my breath, holding the bowl in place while the red mess streaked up my shirt. "You're a menace in the kitchen, Jonas," she said, wiping her hands with a dish towel, "but at least you're enthusiastic." The kitchen in our new coastal home was smaller than our old one, but it didn't feel like less, it felt like ours. The window faced the ocean, and you could hear the waves on days when the wind blew just right. I'd picked the place for peace, but Dolores said it had soul. She was right. We both needed a fresh start. After the lawsuits, the public drama, and the private unraveling of the life I thought I'd built, this house had become a kind of refuge. Noelle had stopped trying to reach me after the court ordered her to pay legal fees and dismissed her claims. Her messages dried up. The social media posts turned sporadic and vague, soft-pedaled hints that her life hadn't gone the way she expected. I hadn't blocked her. I didn't need to. She no longer had access to anything that mattered. The nonprofit had been Dolores's idea. She called it Second Hands, an organization focused on supporting caregivers who had been abandoned, overworked, or forgotten by the very people they were trying to help. She asked me to help build it, and I did, with everything I had. I left my old job behind without regret. We launched a website, assembled a board, and began hosting small events around the city. Donations started slow but steady. The stories poured in. Nurses who worked through holidays, spouses who had watched partners forget them, adult children caught in impossible decisions. We gave them more than a voice. We gave them each other. Dolores, of course, was the chairwoman. She took every call. She answered every email. She recorded monthly video messages that donors ate up like gospel. At 78, she had become a sort of accidental icon for dignity in aging and advocacy. And I just kept the lights on, coordinated logistics, and handled the things she didn't want to. We made a good team. I pulled the burnt pie from the oven and placed it on the counter with theatrical defeat. Dolores raised an eyebrow. "Well," she said, "it's not blackened, per se. Let's call it artistically bronzed." I grinned. "Should we just open the backup dessert now, or pretend we're going to eat this first?" "Pretend, of course. It's Thanksgiving. We have to keep some traditions." We set the table together, even though it was just the two of us. I poured sparkling cider into crystal glasses she'd saved for real occasions. She insisted today qualified. "To second chances," she said, raising her glass. "To knowing when to take them," I replied. We clinked. The turkey was dry, the stuffing too salty, but none of it mattered. We told stories between bites, Dolores about a man she almost married before her second husband, me about the disastrous camping trip my dad took me on when I was 8. We laughed until we cried. At one point, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. "Noelle." Just a text. One word. "Sorry." I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I simply turned the phone over and returned to my plate. I saw her name flash on the screen. Dolores said casually, scooping mashed potatoes. "You going to respond?" I shook my head. "There's nothing to say. She's still playing the same game. I'm not a player anymore." Dolores nodded. "Good." Later that evening, I stood out on the porch with a blanket over my shoulders, watching the tide creep in. The air smelled like salt and rosemary from the sprigs we'd used to season the bird. I thought about how far I'd come, from the man waiting at the kitchen counter with trembling hands to the one standing here now, whole. It hadn't been easy. I'd lost more than just a marriage. I'd lost illusions. I'd lost time. I'd lost the version of myself that believed love meant staying no matter how small you became in someone else's life. But I had gained something better, a clear view of who I was without the noise. Inside, Dolores turned on old records. Nina Simone floated through the air, soft and haunting. I smiled. This Thanksgiving wasn't filled with guests or glamour or perfectly curated holiday cheer. It was filled with truth. And it was enough. Looking back, I realized that the note Noelle left me wasn't the slap in the face I thought it was. It wasn't just an insult wrapped in passive aggression and arrogance. It was an invitation, an unintended challenge. A single piece of paper that forced me to ask a question I hadn't dared to ask in years. Who am I without her? Gone to a show with my ex. We need to catch up. I thought it was time you experienced caregiving. Don't worry, Grandma's all yours. Love, Noelle. I memorized those words. Not because they hurt, though they did, but because they freed me. They were the starting gun of my liberation. Until that moment, I believed the lie we all tell ourselves when we're afraid to confront the truth, that endurance is love, that suffering is a sign of loyalty. But real love doesn't abandon you in your own home. It doesn't delegate dignity. It doesn't make you feel like a placeholder in your own life. I kept that note. It's folded in the bottom drawer of my desk, resting beneath a folder full of trust documents and old photographs. I don't look at it often, but I don't throw it away either. Because every time I see it, I remember what it gave me, not pain, not betrayal, but a choice. The kind that comes once you've lost everything that never truly belonged to you. Dolores taught me that. Not with sermons, but with her presence. Her clarity. Her refusal to be pitted or overlooked. She gave me more than support. She gave me a mirror. When I'd spent too many years avoiding. I didn't save you, she once told me, pouring tea with steady hands. You were already there. I just turned the light on. Caregiving. It's funny how that word used to terrify me. I thought it meant giving yourself away. Sacrificing freedom. Losing your time, your energy, your identity. But it doesn't. Not when it's mutual. Not when it's real. Caregiving, I've learned, is just another form of love. Not the kind you shout about on rooftops or turn into Instagram captions. The kind that happens in silence. In patience. In cleaning out a medicine cabinet or holding someone's hand at the doctor's office. It's showing up. Even when there's nothing glamorous about it. Noelle never understood that. Her version of love was performative. Transactional. She loved the idea of being seen as someone who cared. But caring? That's a different story. That takes depth. Stillness. Surrender. And Noelle didn't do surrender, only spectacle. In the months since everything unfolded, I've learned to measure love differently. Not in grand gestures, but in consistency. In quiet mornings with no tension. In shared laughter over burnt toast. In knowing someone sees you and still chooses to stay. Dolores stayed. She didn't have to. She could have taken her trust, her money, her dignity, and built a fortress around herself. But she let me in. And in return, I showed up. Day after day. Not because I owed her, but because she deserved it. Because I did, too. Sometimes we sit out on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. She tells me stories about her youth, some sweet, some scandalous. I tell her about the nonprofit and the calls I get from people across the country who feel seen for the first time. We don't talk about Noelle much anymore. That chapter closed itself. But sometimes, in the spaces between conversation, I wonder if she ever really meant to start a war, or if she just never expected me to win one. I still get texts from her. Random. Sporadic. One came just last week. No subject line. Just, did you ever really love me? I didn't respond. Because the truth is, I did. In the best way I knew how. I loved her through her selfishness. Through her cold spells. Through every subtle insult dressed as a joke. But that love was a version of myself I've outgrown. The kind that waits to be appreciated. That hopes silence will someday be rewarded with grace. I don't love that way anymore. No, I love myself. Not in a selfish, surface-level way, but in the deep, grounded way that says, I am enough. I am not disposable. I do not need to prove my worth through endurance. I can walk away from anyone who only shows up when the spotlight is on. Dolores says I've changed. That I smile more. That I speak more clearly. That my silences feel lighter now. Maybe she's right. Or maybe I'm just finally living as the man I was always meant to be. Sometimes, people ask me if I regret it. The marriage. The years I spent with Noelle. The breakdown of what was supposed to be a forever kind of love. And I always tell them the same thing. No. Because it brought me here. Here is a modest home by the coast. A mug of tea warming my hands. The faint sound of jazz playing from an old speaker. A handwritten thank you card from a single dad in Ohio who said our nonprofit saved his sanity. Here is peace. Here is clarity. Here is a love that's quiet and fierce and entirely mine. And in this quiet, I finally understand what care really means. It's not what you give up. It's what you choose to give freely. And the moment I realized that was the moment I truly became free,